found also interesting that I don't think we would have seen change in the debate around whip use in racing or the stuff that's going on with elite sport had there not been people who were literally ready to shred up the sport and campaign to get equestrianism banned from the Olympics, and making such an impact that actually suddenly these people who just ignored everything start to get nervous and start to then look for, well, how do we address this? Increased performance does not equate to better welfare.
This episode is very kindly brought to you by Redwings Horse Sanctuary, White Griffin and Westgate Labs. Hello everybody, welcome back to season 3 of This Equestrian Life. Rhiannon, how are you? This is exciting, isn't it?
I know, we've missed you guys. It's good to be back, and we're kicking off with a really good episode this week. Miri and I, you may have seen on our social platforms, and sorry, also I have a cold today, so it might sound a bit different than normal. Sorry. Ick. Great way to start.
Just don't sniff too much and we'll be fine.
I know, yeah, mute myself. But we went up to Northumberland. That's not right.
What? We went to Norfolk. I'll tell you a story about this to start with, right? So Rhi basically gaslit me. No, that's not right. She hoodwinked me into telling me that we were going to Essex to a Redwings sanctuary. And I was like, perfect. My anxiety is really bad at the moment. I'm feeling all this regulation and all this weird stuff. Essex is quite close to where I live. If I feel really not good, I can come home, because it was a 2-day trip and an overnight stay. About 4 days before we're due to go on this trip, we start looking at like how long it's going to take us to get there, and where we're going for dinner, and all of these things, like where we're staying, da 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 da. And I said to Rhi, I was like, I think there might be a mistake, because this says that we're going to Norfolk. And Rhi was like, no, I don't think so. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, it turns out we were going to Norfolk. It was so wonderful, and I did survive, and my anxiety actually was really manageable and great, and I was really proud of myself for staying away on my own and all of those things. But it was quite funny, wasn't it, when we realised you suddenly had to stay an extra night.
Well, I did feel really bad about that, because I am conscious of your anxiety, and I did feel like I made it worse, so I felt bad. But yeah, I had to scramble and be like, oh my gosh, it's like 4 hours for me, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get there at the right time. So anyway, Lydia at Redwings was incredible, and it was all fine, and it was a lovely 2 days.
Yeah, we had such a good time. We basically had I don't think I really realised what a sanctuary like Redwings actually does, what a charity like Redwings actually does. And we were shown around the whole facility. So the facility that we went to isn't open to the public. And so we basically had like the best behind the scenes tour that anyone's ever had. It was really cool.
Well, they kind of wanted to show us the cycle of the work that they do. So they do 5 key things. They do rescue, which I think everybody knows, rehabilitation, rehoming, sanctuary, and then campaigning. So rescuing ponies and donkeys and horses, rehabilitating them with veterinary and also behaviour, rehoming the appropriate ponies, sanctuary for the ponies that can't be rehomed, and then the campaigns they do with the public to kind of just help horse welfare in general. And they have this lovely sort of mission, which is like everything for the love of the horse. And it's a really lovely way to be. And we basically got to spend time with all of the teams. So we went and saw some of the ponies. They had the one that sticks in my mind was they have this group of feral ponies from, I'm not going to try and pronounce it, but somewhere in Wales, where these ponies weren't wild, but they'd basically been allowed to just go wild a bit with the breeding, and nobody was like really taking responsibility for them, and the welfare became a bit of an issue. And so because these horses were feral and had also only ever had negative experiences with people, they were really difficult to work with. And the Redwings team needed to make sure that they could put head collars on them and trim their feet and do the veterinary stuff like injections and all the rest of it. So what they've been doing is R+ training, which obviously most of us, I think, on this podcast have heard of before, positive reinforcement, which has been used in zoos and what have you for a long time. And they are using that to train these ponies to like work with humans. And it was just very cool, because I don't think you think of places like Redwings as maybe being on the cutting edge of what could be the future of behaviour and welfare in the industry. And it was very, very cool. I really enjoyed that.
I think it was super interesting as well, wasn't it, to see like I deal with quite dysregulated horses, but they're very rarely they're not feral, and there's such a big gap between like unhandled as a young horse. So sometimes they come to me, they you know, somebody might tell me they should probably have a head collar left on in the stable. I don't tend to do that, by the way, but sometimes I have been given that kind of information. But there is such a big gap between that and feral, and it was super, super eye-opening to watch the work that they did. And I think both Rhi and I will probably share some more on our channels as we go on to talk more about it. And actually I feel so inspired watching them deal with these lovely ponies that were, you know, really complicated and really not trained, not, you know, you can't just go and put a head collar on them. And the way that they were working with consent and like cooperative care, they call it, where it's basically like, how do you ask the horse to cooperate? It was so inspiring. I've been doing some stuff with Blondie, and I know you've been doing some stuff with Harley as well. And it's just amazing how much effort was being put in.
Yes.
And the one thing that really, really stood out for me was every single horse, regardless of their size, age, type, worth, previous life, every single horse is treated in exactly the same way. And I think that the equestrian world could take a lot from that. And we have a conversation coming up for you guys today with Nic, who is one of their head vets, and he is head of Welfare and Behaviour. And the conversation that we had about the top of the sport and welfare issues and all, you know, the whole picture was just, I just think he had such a good take on all of it, and it was a really refreshing conversation to have with somebody as, you know, kind of important as he is. You know, he will go on a lot of boards and having a lot of conversations about these hard topics, and yeah, I'm so grateful that we got the opportunity to talk to him. It was such an interesting conversation.
Agreed. We spent a lot of time with him over the 2 days, as you can imagine, and he was always just very measured and very fair. I felt like he wasn't really far one way or the other, and I hope that comes across in the conversation that you hear today. He, you know, talking about more complicated areas of the industry, talking about racing, and he has a couple of points that's like, in fairness to X and Y, this and research and and so it's just a very measured approach. And I think we're in a period where we need that. We need people to weigh everything up and be balanced, and it was great. He was very generous with his time, and we're excited for you to hear it.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes that, you know, something that we have really tried to encompass, I don't think that's quite the right word, but maybe, you know, promote on this platform with our podcast, is that it's not that straightforward, any of it. And that he really got into that, didn't he? About, you know, we can't just stop the bad stuff from happening, and what can we do? And, you know, I took so much away from those 2 days, and there were some really entertaining moments that we had over the couple of days where we were talking to all of the different staff members, and it was something that really stood out to me that I don't think we really got to talk about in that conversation with Nic. But like, people loved being there, the staff loved being there, and there's like a running joke that if you hadn't been there for, we do talk about this again in that conversation, but like if you hadn't been there for like 8 years or something, you're still an apprentice essentially.
Yes.
You know, and that's quite normal. And he had been in his job, you know, for 35 years, I think, and it just stands testament to like when there's a really, really pure cause and a really clear motivation, then people stick around.
Yeah, and really interesting to hear from people who'd left and gone into mainstream vet practices or other yards and had just come back. And that was a really, you know, they were like, this isn't for me. I want to be back at Redwings. It did feel like a very special place. And actually, I was very surprised. I think you said it earlier, the level of effort when we went to visit the horses that were being prepared for rehoming. That was so fun. We got to work with. There were a few like little cobs that we got to work with in the school. They were super generous, letting Miri and I have a play with their training. And they are just like so well trained. They are so responsive. Like they teach them to back up from the lightest touch, move forward from the lightest touch. They teach them to do all of these things in preparation for, you know, quote unquote, the outside world with their new owners. And they're so careful about how they rehome. You know, they have phone calls and then they have visits and more visits, and they really are really careful about how they match people up. And it was just so lovely. These horses, I just walked away feeling so kind of enamored by these horses who had often had such horrible experiences and were still kind of showing up with such like lovely energy towards humans. Like it just baffles me that horses will do that.
Yeah. We also had some very special interactions with some donkeys, didn't we?
We did.
I had a cuddle with a donkey for like 5 minutes. There's actually a video. We need to find that video. But just, I think, yeah, like all of the animals that we met, there were ponies that had been through the most devastating human failure, would be what I'd call it. You know, they had been failed by humans, and they're publicly talked about on the Redwings social media. And we met one of them, and, you know, they showed us a picture of him, and he's like, he had literally been thrown away out of wherever he was into a pile of rubbish, and he was found by 2 policemen, women,
upside down,
police people, upside down in this pile of rubbish. He looked dead, and I think that they thought he was dead, and he was like this just lovely, happy little guy. And we went up, and he was like, "Hello, would you like to take a picture with me?" And we were like, "Yes, please." And he, you know, there's no sort of grudge holding. Yeah, I think
amazing.
And I think that is testament to the amazing work that Redwings do. And I think that I really learned that actually rehoming a pony or becoming a guardian of a pony from Redwings would be such a lovely thing to do, because it's not like you're getting a disaster that's not going to be able to have its feet done or this, that and the other. Those are the ones that end up staying with their very specialist care or ending up in specialist homes. And I did say I would one day like to take on some donkeys that need specialist care, but that's a whole other thing.
We did have to check Miri's boot before she left, just in case.
Yeah, literally.
Little Charlotte,
They told us a story, didn't they, of somebody who tried to steal a pony under their skirt.
Oh yeah, under that, yeah.
On like an open day, they tried to steal one of the miniatures under their skirt. Isn't that absolutely the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard? What a plan! Imagine that. Do you think it was an on-the-spot plan, or do you think they were like, you know what, I'm going to go to that Redwings open day and I'm going to nick a pony and I'm going to wear this ludicrous skirt so that I can do that? What?
They are just adorable. Like, I keep thinking about, was it Charlotte? Was she a little Welsh section? Was she a section D? I don't know. No, right.
She was a section A.
She was tiny. Yeah, section A. She was just so cute and pint-sized, and just imagine someone like trying to...
She was done, wasn't she? Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Anyway, but we should probably get into our conversation with Nic. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
It is my absolute pleasure to introduce this season's sponsor, White Griffin. White Griffin, and more specifically Equestrians for Nature, was founded to make sure that we can help every equestrian to know what the problems are with sustainability, how it affects them, their horse, and what we can do about it if we choose to. No politics, no pressure, just the facts delivered in a relevant way, which felt very aligned to Miri and I. And so throughout the next 10 episodes, we're going to be giving you little tidbits here and there through each episode of things that we can be doing to be more sustainable. Miri, do you want to talk a bit about why this partnership is so important to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think as a group of informed and caring equestrians, it felt like a really meaningful partnership to not only give something back to a brand that is doing something really important, but a way of helping and sharing ways that us as equestrians can be more sustainable, something that I think I'm really quite passionate about. I think, as equestrians, we can come under a lot of scrutiny, and it is important that we as individuals are doing the best we possibly can for the environment and for our horses and the longevity of horses in equestrian sport and as, everyday leisure activities as such. So I'm really looking forward to sharing our, some really good advice basically on how we can all be more sustainable with our horses and why that is so important. It may not seem that important, but it really is something that we can all gain from and also give back with as such. What about you? Why do you feel like it's an important conversation to be having?
Well, I want to keep having horses for my whole life, I hope. And the way that I'm looking at the planet and the local environments now, even if you're thinking about the grazing, the changing seasons, the availability of grass and land, etc., and also the scrutiny that we're getting from other industries. So at a selfish level, I want to be able to do my bit to try and reduce the impact of that. But I guess at a broader level, we want to be able to keep doing this for generations, right? And it's not just even equestrianism. It goes a little bit broader, I would say, into agriculture and caring for the land in general. And if we want that for the next generation, we have to do stuff now. So yeah, stay tuned, I guess, for more advice from White Griffin as we go through the series. And if you want to learn about the work that they do right now, you can find links to them in the show notes.
That leads us really nicely onto our conversation with Nic. So here you go. Here is our conversation. And yeah, I think everything is really tying in with this episode. So here you go.
Okay, Nic, we are sat here with you, and actually just before we hit record, half of the Redwings team in the room told you to behave yourself. So I'm already looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. We've already told him which words he can't say and which words he can. So who knows whether he'll behave himself. So Nic, can you introduce yourselves to the podcast? Tell us, who you are and what you do for Redwings.
Okay, so my name's Nic de Brauwere. I'm a veterinary surgeon that was trained in South Africa. Came over here for a bit of a quick learn some skills, make some money, travel Europe, go back to South Africa, and couldn't get a horse job as a new grad locum, so applied for longer term jobs and had 3 interviews, and Redwings was the 3rd one. And I didn't know that actually welfare organisation actually was a thing. So it was intriguing, and when I walked through the door for the interview, I bumped into a colleague who was here ahead of me at vet school, Hildegard, and she'd taken the first full-time job at Redwings. The local practice had actually told Redwings that they should probably consider getting their own vet because the work was so much now that they were going to have to employ a vet in private practice. And I think testament to the vets at the practice, they sort of said it's going to be cheaper for you to have your own vet than for us to get a new vet, and they have to bill you. So they did that, and Hildegard got involved in designing the first hospital and bringing in some sort of systemic things linked to being a vet. And so when I walked through the door, so the connection with Hildegard was quite funny because she was a very serious rider. And at vet school, we had a riding school, which was done with the experimental ponies and the teaching ponies. So there was a herd of those. And she'd fallen for this thoroughbred that had been left there to be potentially used for experimental surgeries and stuff. And he was affected by a stifle problem, and they'd just come up with a new technique to operate on those. So the owners, he couldn't race. So he was left there under the insurance on the condition he never left the university. And he was then started to get schooled by Hildegard, and he just moved like a dream. He was a thoroughbred, but the tail swung like a pendulum, and he had the softest canter, the softest trot. And a delightful horse, and he was still entire as well. And so Hildegard started to ride him, and then when she went into final year, she didn't have the time to do all that, so I took him on. And turns out there was a way of him retiring out of the university, and he actually ended up going home with me when I qualified and became my mom's pony. But the connection, so the next thing I walked through the interview here, and Hildegard sat in the room questioning me. So I think that was very fortuitous because they liked Hildegard. So they offered her the job, me the job off the back of the interview, alongside a more experienced vet who said he'd take the job, but he was just finishing his sailing around the UK or something, and he never turned up.
Oh,
so that was quite amusing because I was meant to be second fiddle to a more experienced vet, and then basically just stepped in the same way Hildegard had. So it was very exciting because it was any horse value is immaterial. You just treat them all equally and give them what they need. It did challenge because I think there was also a real difficulty in working out when enough was enough, when euthanasia was appropriate. So it did challenge me and the team. We had a qualified nurse and several nursing assistants, and we just did everything, including our first colic surgery. And nice anecdote there was that the vet who had worked at the local practice and was a very good friend of the charity and of Hildegard's, had gone to Liverpool University where they were starting to do colic surgeries quite seriously. And so I'd always dreamt of doing it. I'd run to every colic surgery at vet school to go and watch. And, so we had a horse that really needed help and probably wasn't going to make the journey down to Newmarket, which is where he used to send them down to the practice there. And so Tim was available. He was back in Norfolk picking up the last of his furniture, but he was also playing a rugby match. And the mobile phones were just the thing. So I phoned, found out that he was there. So he said, look, get the horse ready. I'm playing rugby. I'll finish the second half and then I'll come and help you.
Right.
So
Priority.
wait for the rugby game to finish. But actually, we took quite a long time to do this, but actually the mare survived. And I took great pleasure going to Newmarket and saying to the surgeon, so what's your success rate in colic surgery? Because mine's 100%. And with the grace that they actually have, the practice has been very supportive of Redwings all through and still nowadays. They found that quite amusing and were always there to support us. So I kind of had this ability to have a referral centre at the end of a phone. But had this opportunity at Redwings to put everything I learned in vet school into practice without compromise. There wasn't owners saying, I can't afford it. Owners feeling that maybe they didn't want to go down this particular route. So it put a lot of pressure on us to do the right thing, but also gave us opportunities to actually do what we'd been taught was the right thing to do. And we could try stuff without ever experimenting on the ponies.
Yes.
And so we learned an awful lot. And I think we also learned an awful lot. One of my worst subjects at vet school was production animals, sheep, pigs, cattle. I had very little passion for that. But herd health was, most production animals, the vets are there to stop them getting sick rather than treat them when they get sick. So applying that to this herd of horses at Redwings was very much the sort of thing that this penny dropped in my head, that instead of treating all these colics that happened because it turned out we were getting 2 different types of feeds from one manufacturer and then another. And when we switched from one batch to the next, they would all just get lots of gas and there'd be lots of farting and lots of rolling on the paddocks. And we'd go around with bottles of buscopan and just giving these horses a jab to get them right. And so, actually, this doesn't need to happen. So the ability as a vet to recognise things that were preventable was a real opportunity.
That's really interesting. I think we're gonna get on to sort of the talking about the prevention of horses ending up at Redwings. What is, in your experience, having worked here now for, as it sounds like, a number of years, how
20.
34-ish years you've been at Redwings,
Yes, my only job, I tell people.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah, well, that's really impressive to hear, and actually, that's something that has been a resounding theme as we've spoken to people over these last couple of days. Is the amount of time that people are here, and there's actually a running joke that if you've been here for 8 years, you're still very much an apprentice, and if it's anything under that, you're probably still work experience and you don't even get paid yet. So it's been a very funny thing because it really stands testament to what you guys do here, because people want to stay, and I think that stands for a lot. Working with horses isn't the most glamorous thing to do in the world. We all know that, but it's interesting to hear what a wonderful kind of, institution is the wrong word because it's actually got the wrong connotation, but that kind of a feeling of the community that has been created here is evidently so strong. I did have a question in there, I think, about where are we in the state of welfare in the UK, and
it's changed a lot in the last 34 years, I think.
It has. So I think what I found was in the beginning it was all through the lens of being a vet. So welfare was always health, and to some extent vets took the conversation around welfare under their wing and then made it about veterinary improvements. And there's been quite a lot of challenge over the last few years that increased performance does not equate to better welfare. But a lot of welfare funding went to make horses faster, higher. But we also have to acknowledge whatever criticisms there are, for example, of the racing industry, their funding and not any money coming from private owners is what has given us the knowledge we have about flu, vaccinations for flu, strangles. The money for research has generally come either from charities or from the industries that we are now quite happy to criticise. And it does highlight how when you change from a sort of performance-focused industry and idea about welfare to one on a horse-centred one, you do then start to have to reflect on current practices. And I think we need to be respectful of the people that you're now criticising, because actually when you find out why racing does what they do, you also see that a lot of it's in the practice that they have are embedded into their way of doing things because they are good for health. They prevent disease, they reduce risk for injury and things like that. So whilst you can see a horse in a paddock as being protected from injury and kept healthy and optimal because you can check how much they drink and how much they eat and so on. But being solitary for a herd animal is really difficult for that animal to cope with. So we're having to find ways in which accepted best practices modified without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I think the conversation around welfare has very much moved from what the vets say to what the horse is saying. But it's proving quite difficult for people to hear some of the things that are good for horses.
It's a really interesting point that actually a lot of the funding has come from these industries that now maybe people find more difficult. How do you reconcile that with yourself when you think about the top of the sport and maybe some of the challenges that come with that, but knowing that a lot of money flows through that and therefore research into health? How do you as an individual and somebody who works in welfare reconcile those two things together? Because I hadn't thought about the other side of that, the research. And as you said, we've always been quite happy to criticise them. So how do you balance that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting for me is that a lot of that money's actually come from betting. Actually, a punter sitting in a bookies that's paid for the research rather than the industry voluntarily taking a chunk of their money. And I would say that the equestrian sports have been woeful in their contribution to welfare and research. There's very few areas where you see competition money having a percentage going to charitable causes or research. So I think there's a definite sort of, if you look at the vast sums spent on buying horses and competition prize monies and, to buy a lorry that can get your horses to and from competitions around Europe is, what some people spend on a decent house. So I do think that there's not as much putting your money where your mouth is as there could be. And I think it's a sad reflection in the industry that Redwings is supported by people who haven't got that much, who still decide to support us rather than those who have so much money that they wouldn't notice if they paid for a new piece of veterinary equipment.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is possibly part of people recognizing what caring about horses really means and, genuinely caring about the horse rather than caring about the pleasure they get out of being in a competitive environment or stuff around that industrial side of horses.
Do Redwings work with some of these, like the kind of the top of the sport kind of, or the foundations or the industry leaders as such?
Not much, but we've had exceptional support from leaders in the industry for things like our Stamp Out Stranglers campaign and Stranglers Awareness Week, which has been really nice to see because I think infectious disease, for example, is something that everyone recognises is a barrier to their horses being healthy and them being able to compete. So, and that suffering of horses that are clinically ill is something that everybody recognises. So I think those sort of things, it's much easier to get people to tap into it. I remember being chastised by people from the equestrian world in various formats when I was first at Redwings and said I worked here and I was the vet. So they expected me to be all powerful and to immediately change things that they disapproved of. And they used to say things like, "It's so sad that the horses go there and don't have a job. They must be so bored." And I just used to end the conversation by going, well, generally, from the way I see it, they just want to play with their friends, eat, poop, and perhaps have babies, and that's the only thing we stop them doing. And they seem blissfully happy. And to talk about horses being happy was just horrendous for the audiences that I was speaking to. That just didn't compute that a horse didn't need to have a job to have a good quality of life. And I definitely learned that by being at Redwings, where you just saw the horses doing what horses do because you kept them in herds, you let them do what they wanted. We were their servants rather than the other way around. And I actually think that's testament to how Redwings has been able to have that conversation from the horse's perspective because we were not dependent on the equestrian world for our existence. And we're actually an outsider for a very long time. So I think it hasn't been a big part of us because of that. We were very much outliers. And I think actually when we did have some strong reflection on how we were doing things, and there were some big changes in Redwings over the years, when people then came to visit us, when some of those changes happened, they were quite blown away. They didn't expect us to have the level of professionalism that you would have seen last couple of days. They still thought we were sort of a little bit of a crazy two-bit sanctuary out on the margins that just had more money than sense and should probably just stop. And then they came to visit us and realized with a bit of shock that actually the vets were not necessarily doing intricate surgery inside joints, but they were doing life-saving colic surgery comfortably. Now, I think that was a real pleasure for us to see that people underestimated us. And I think over the years, with particularly things like our Stamp Out Strangles campaign, people have started to recognize that we have an expertise, and therefore we are obviously professional, and therefore there's something for them to start to take us seriously. And I think over those years, we've become very much a strong force in the charitable world and the welfare sector. And I think slowly, the equestrian world has recognised that, but probably still more for our health stuff than maybe our discussions around mental well-being and welfare.
I think that's a really important thing as well to just note. I know you've got a question, Rhi, but that actually often the best way to enforce change or help change is not to make people feel bad about how they are doing things, but to lead them, to show them that there is a different way of doing it, to inspire, I suppose. And I think for the last couple of days walking around with you guys, understanding how much you guys do, all of the different things that you're doing, not just, we met wild ponies yesterday that literally they've had only a bad time at the hands of humans. And to see this amazing work that you guys are doing, this very forward thinking, very progressive way of looking at horse care. And I think what you touched on earlier about, there are kind of methods within the different levels of sport that maybe aren't ethically what you guys would align with, and they're maybe doing them for different reasons. It's interesting to see that sort of forward thinking, like, actually, I'm not going to say that what you're doing is wrong and bad because it's all but this is how you can do it, and this forward thinking, open-minded kind of approach of just learning and showing is really, well, I've been really, in awe of the last couple of days.
Yeah, no, it's, I think, a good reflection of the colleagues that are around us at Redwings, definitely.
Mm-hmm. I felt a little bit emotional actually when you said earlier about the top of the sport actually weren't the ones putting their money into research, and it sort of happened as a byproduct, and that actually Redwings is held up by people that don't have very much. And I felt quite emotional, one, because that is sad, but two, because actually there is such a power in that. And I think this is a time when people are feeling really quite despondent when they look around at the sport that they used to love or the sport that they used to aspire to, and feeling that it no longer aligns with what they feel. And actually, I think there's something really powerful in people understanding that, like, if you have the funds, and even if you don't, your support of companies like Redwings puts you in the driver's seat of what horse welfare could be like in the future.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could talk a bit about that other side of the equestrian space, which is the hundreds of thousands of people who are everyday horse owners. What can we do to help our horses and help companies like Redwings?
I mean, I think so. The journey I went through with Redwings, and I think to some extent the industry is going through, is that initially we were here to deal with the obvious neglect and cruelty. And it is still the bread and butter of rescue organisations that are expected by the public to respond to a horse that's in distress. And it is what we are here to try and deal with, so that if a horse is in distress, there's somebody, whether it's us or one of the partner organisations in the National Equine Welfare Council, that between us we can kind of go, this is not in our patch, so we can't actually get someone out to you, but we know someone who can, or try this number, they'll be able to send someone, or that we will collectively work on a job involving lots of animals and then divvy them up between us and sort of go, okay, this needs sanctuary care, so there's 2 or 3 organisations that can be sanctuary care. So we're trying to make the most of the money that's being generously donated to us. But it's been a long while where we've already recognised that actually when you get the chance to see our horses out in the field at Redwings and realise what they want, and then you realise what a lot of horses are being given in the private homes, that they're not having the best life. but they're still really healthy. They're getting a lot of attention and care. And the Animal Welfare Act was a big game changer because it changed the emphasis from input, what you did, to what it actually affected the animal. So actually your effort is irrelevant to the impact on the animal. So you can have somebody who does very little for their horses, but they have a good life. And you have someone who puts a lot of effort in, but it's all focused on things that don't matter to the horse. And that got us to realize that actually more horses in private homes probably have suboptimal welfare, despite the best intentions of the owner. And I think that is gradually becoming part of the conversation. So that speaks to the vast majority of horse owners in this country. And it's a very complicated subject because you've got the influence of the elite who are then caught red-handed doing things that are inappropriate. But, the use of the whip is such an emotive and obvious thing, but it's really a long way off what the real fundamental issues are around horses in the elite horse, maybe traveling in a horse box, for half their life. They're in different places, and there's research going into sleep now, how much these horses sleep at these big events. Are that the environment's actually calm and restful, and the use of tech and the use of training techniques. And so that is definitely an issue that, the filtering down of what's seen as best practice has been quite skewed over the years. And what I think we can try and do, and I think that's where we still have a lot of work to do, but I've always said our horses at Redwings have a job. When someone said this horse needs a job, and its job is to teach other people how to think about the horse. And we don't make them work, but what they do here and how they respond to us teaches us. So what we did with we had to sort strangles out of Redwings. A lot of the horses that came in were positive strangles, and they taught us how to resolve things like long-term carriers and manage heartbreaks and so on. So that information was sitting here, and our first campaigns manager, Andy, just thought, what's all this knowledge doing sitting in these four walls? Why is it not out there? And actually, it was really interesting to see how that turned into a campaign and how much work it takes to structure a message in a way that's going to have an impact. And I think it's really hard. What has our Strangles campaign actually done? And you can't actually sort of go, well, it's eradicated strangles, but we have seen yards that are now inspired to have a screening program, and that they've picked up carriers coming in, and that when a colleague phones you when you're on holiday in another country and says, I've just had a horse diagnosed despite having a screening program, we've got strangles on the yard, what do I do? And immediately you can just reel off in half an hour all the things they can consider, and then they go away and do it, and you think, that's pretty cool. Because otherwise they would have been on their own, and vets probably are quite guilty of a lot of things that we learn at vet school. You just hang on to, and then one day you need it, and you go back to what you learned when you were a fourth year because it's not your thing. So strangles is definitely a sort of disease that a lot of us are not that good at staying up to date. So if you ask me about lameness issues and which drugs are the best to keep joints healthy, I haven't got a clue. But when we can talk about things that we know as a result of what our horses have taught us here, we can contribute. And, things that I actually also am really proud of is that my colleagues, they phoned me from Liverpool University and said, we've got a pony here from a client and it's got cytostoniasis and it's looking bad. What do you guys do? And it's like, yeah, we've seen more cases of that through the neglect that's come through the door than probably most other vets had at the time. And I asked my other colleague who actually did the clinical work to speak to them because she knew the detail of when do you use a plasma transfusion, when do you use anti-inflammatories, do you use fluids, when do you give up, and all of those questions. So we're sort of a bit on the fringes in one way, but equally our horses do contribute. And I think the area that they will potentially contribute the most is giving the average horse owner the opportunity to see that this is what horses want and this is what a happy horse looks like. And so much research is going into now truly understanding the affective state, the emotional experience of the horse, and how we can influence that. And probably then the other big thing that we need to be more conscious of, which came from our Strangles campaign, is human behaviour and how you can change people's ways. And I think your point is really important, that you do want people to want to make the changes, so you don't want to alienate them. But it's also interesting that I don't think we would have seen change in the debate around whip use in racing or the stuff that's going on with elite sport, had there not been people who were literally ready to shred up the sport and campaign to get equestrianism banned from the Olympics, and making such an impact that actually suddenly these people who just ignored everything start to get nervous and start to then look for, well, how do we address this? And usually the first thing is, you welfare wash. You just create this illusion that you really put the horse first. And then when people kind of go, well, actually, that's not really anything that the horse benefits from, they've over time. So you do need people who put strong pressure on stubborn parts of the industry to change. I think that's very different from the average horse owner, and average is no such thing, I think, as an average horse owner. But I think people who keep their horses for the love of the horse, all you need to do is get them to redirect their understanding of what that should look like, rather than that there's any lack of motivation on their part to do what's best for their horse. And I think that's tricky. And I think for Redwings, it's tricky in the sense that we've not always been seen as an equestrian organisation. So we don't, like the BHS, have feelers in, a lot of livery yards because they have their livery accreditation scheme. So, of course, they really have a detailed understanding of the dynamics of running a yard. And I think for us, opportunities to meet people like you and working with Cheryl from Livery List, where you offer information to them, but then you start to get an insight into the kind of challenges they have, how difficult it is to run a livery yard, and what's the cost implication of putting a straddle screening program into place. And those sort of things give us opportunities then to go, well, actually, maybe we need to show that we can do it here. Because if we can do it, then you could do it. But actually, we know that some of the things are really difficult. So how do you keep a colt that's been used to being starved in a good body condition, so it's not obese, so it doesn't have the risks of hypoglycemia and laminitis and all the issues that come with being too heavy for your joints and so on, that isn't going to be frustrated and without food for more than 6 hours at a time, and doesn't break through fences because it wants to get to the grass and potentially gets on the road or has a fight in the field next door. So, or hoovers up everything and then gets sound colic. So we've got real challenges here to do what's best for the horses. So what we're learning would hopefully then go on to help other people work out, okay, so how can I do this for my horse?
I think one of the things that has definitely come up for us a lot over the last year of recording the podcast is a lot around turnout. A lot of conversation around turnout, changing climate, that, we've had much wetter winters and autumns, and then now very dry springs and summers. We're starting to see a real change in the way that grazing is handled, and people are becoming far less tolerant of yards turning around and saying really restricted turnout and stuff. And I think that's something that definitely, seeing how your horses live here, and obviously, you guys have got lovely facility and a lot of space, but it is interesting, taking that conversation back to the livery yards and, getting people to understand what big part of what we see ourselves doing is just bringing awareness to that point of, it isn't acceptable if your livery yard turns around and closes the grazing for 6 months of the year because they want to protect the fields. The reality is they need to have less horses so that they can sustain turnout. I myself changed my policy last year. I took less horses through the winter where we've had all these random winters that don't sustain horses so well, so that I could have horses turned out all of the time, because there had been times when I had to restrict the grazing and it didn't feel good because I'm a tenant I tenant a yard, I don't own it, so I can't just destroy the grazing and then be like, oh well, who cares, I have the restrictions. So I think it is interesting as well, like you're saying, like all of these ways that we can inspire and show and guide and encourage is the way forward, because that's what's going to drive change, it feels like to me.
Yeah, and I've noticed that there's quite a few in one particularly strong Facebook group that talks about track deliveries, and there's a lot of generous sharing of experiences, because I think tracks are the long way of being the solution. I think you just need to have enough acreage to be able to then provide that. And that's, we're at a particularly difficult point at the moment for Redwings because funding is tight, costs have shot up, and the weather over the last few years has made the ground struggle to keep the number of horses that we are used to keeping. So it's really, what used to be fields that would occasionally get a bit waterlogged, and in winter you just give the horses somewhere dry to stand. Now, aren't recovering because when they're meant to recover in the spring, there's no rain or there's too much rain. And I think that must be exactly the same experience for everybody else. And so we probably need, you don't want to make keeping horses unaffordable for people, but we need to probably be realistic that they need more space per horse. Because, I mean, the big threats are the climate change, so that not having an environment where we can keep horses or afford the hay that we need. But actually, worms are a huge problem.
This feels like a good moment to thank one of the sponsors of this podcast. Westgate believes that every horse deserves the best possible care, no matter their age, breed, or background. One of the most important aspects of keeping horses healthy is managing the risk of internal parasites. It's something all horses face, and effective parasite control plays a vital role in their well-being. Westgate are especially passionate about supporting vulnerable horses, those that may have had a difficult start in life, young horses, veterans, or any horse with health conditions that affect their immune system. That's why Westgate are proud to work closely with Redwings and their Guardian Scheme members, supporting regular parasite testing to help protect these horses from further harm. When a horse comes into Redwings care, parasite control is just as important as vet visits, vaccinations, dental care, and good nutrition. Worm egg counts assess whether parasites are present, what type they are, and how significant the burden might be. Then, taking into account the horse's age, body condition, and clinical history, an appropriate treatment is advised. This targeted approach also means avoiding administering unnecessary worming chemicals, especially for horses who may already be fragile. It's about giving each horse exactly what they need and supporting a part of their recovery and long-term health in a responsible way. Any horse owner can take advantage of Westgate's award-winning tests by using the code EQLIFE10 to get 10% off. This is excluding the Equisal tapeworm tests and subscription plans.
And they require quite intensive paddock management. There are ways in which you can not pick up a single piece of poop in your entire life and still have healthy horses, but it's a big ask. There was at Penn State University, they had a research herd of ponies there, 100 small ponies of Shetland types, Sue McDonald's research group over the years. They never picked up a poop in their life. They also had no worms because they had enough space that the horses could move from an area to a different area to an area. And of course, the climate was such that the worms wouldn't survive particularly long because they have really strong hot summers.
Right.
So things would die and desiccate. So you can see that there are ways in which you can manage a worm population without drugs, but it requires resources that most of us don't have access to. But seeing that then can inspire people to think about different ways. So, for example, probably on trackways, there's that opportunity that they may not pick up as much stuff off the floor, therefore worms might not get into them. So we need to keep looking at different ways of doing things because the rules have changed.
Yeah.
So it's not just that trackways might be better for horse welfare and managing weight. Actually, just going back to how we used to do it, the land can't cope with it. A few people now speak of being stewards of the land. You need to be a farmer of the land before you're a horse keeper.
Yes.
And there's parts of Australia horses are seen as vermin, and to get licenses to have a equestrian establishment, you have to meet a higher threshold than a lot of farming does because of the damage they do. So if you keep them tightly restricted to stop them getting fat, you're actually damaging the land, and then in a drought, the plants just blow away, and then you've got nothing. So there are quite tight rules in part of Australia on keeping horses. So I think we have to recognise that people are going to start looking more closely at how we keep our horses for all sorts of reasons. And I think in finding things difficult here at Redwings, hopefully we will find some of the solutions through our own endeavours, and we can also maybe look at what other charities do. So I think we do have good conversations. So Horseworld had a fully funded research project that was carried out using their facilities, looking at their experiments with truckways. But Roxanne Coaten, our former colleague here, who's now at the RSPCA, she did a project for her MSc with Sarah's horse at the Behaviour Centre, comparing truck grazing with...
Yes, we heard about this yesterday a little bit. Yeah, very interesting.
And it showed real promise. So it's an area we need to explore more because it's not necessarily less work than what we're doing at the moment, but it's a different way, and it seems to suit the horses in the land better. And we don't really have the capacity to do full-on research, but we can make good observations of what we're doing, what works and what doesn't, and then open ourselves up to maybe somebody else coming and doing the research here by spending time sitting in the field watching our horses, or looking at even just the data that we're generating. So just the weights of our horses and their body scores that we did. Sarah and Roxanne did that. It was written up and actually went into the vet record as a nice, easy letter to the in the vet records of the British Veterinary Association's publication. So it's very widely read. So it's not a high-level peer-reviewed publication, but it got a lot of attention because it just showed how we can actually manage the weights of these horses without restricting their access to grass in the summer months. But as we saw yesterday, some of them are still quite punchy, and it's hard to do that year in, year out. So it's a really good example of how complicated it is to do the best thing by your horse.
Feels like, though, maybe what you're saying, it feels like maybe, and this is a hopeful moment, that we're maybe in this era of we're open to change, we're open to experimenting, to innovation, and just having an open mind to those things and not being afraid of getting the wrong answer, not feeling shame, just being open to thinking differently. I think maybe it's probably one of the most powerful things.
Absolutely. I think I come back to that phrase, when we know better, we do better.
Yeah.
And that's just got to be how we look at it. Nobody knows everything. No, you guys are very evidently open to change, and we've been doing things like this, and then we've actually been doing things like that. And like you're saying, using these horses who, I don't really like the word using a horse, but at the same time, utilizing this opportunity where all of these horses have needed a lot of care, and now they have that care to then help the wider population of horses to learn from what you guys are learning. I think that's such a powerful, amazing message, and such a great reason to be, like you were saying, like that power to the individual. If they can support your charity, they're actually helping the future generations of horses to come and those people, because you guys are the ones with the opportunity to do the research. It's hard to do research on a little livery yard, right? So
But,
a really powerful full circle.
So I suppose it's we reflect on the fact that things are challenging for us at the moment. We know they are for everybody. I think we don't really have a handle on our industry in all the detail that we need to, but there is a sort of feeling that maybe there's too many horses for the number of good homes that we've got, and that some of the problems we've picked up have been from excess breeding. So, we're the Model T Ford of Gypsy Colts here, largely the product of a very small number of individuals who overbred because they got greedy. So, everywhere you look, there's a black and white colt, and we adore them. A lot of people didn't think they were particularly interesting animals to have, and they're frustratingly middle-sized, rather than big wagon-pulling colt or a nice little kid's pony. They're sort of in the middle, but actually they seem to be doing really well in the homes that they go into. But that whole saga that we've had involvement in since 2009, I would say, show that the industry doesn't have any regulatory framework in place to put the brakes on someone who goes off the rails. And research done, I think, by the RSPCA and a few others showed that the overproduction of horses, i.e. horses that are bred but nobody really wants, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with them, is coming as much from people who just have a foal at home than it is from these notorious breeders who overproduce.
That's really interesting to know that the balance, because there is quite a stigma, right, around the what you're discussing, and it's good to hear, actually, and important, and we've discussed it briefly on the podcast before, the kind of backyard breeding as such. I'm not talking about dogs, I'm talking about people who are like, oh yeah, I've got this lovely mare and I had a foal from it, and I hold my hands up, I actually am culprit of this myself. I bred from one of my ponies, and a lovely pony, and I would give that a pony at home for life, and unfortunately she became injured, and so I have ended up now with more horses than have a kind of purpose as such. She broke her shoulder when she was 18 months old, just really rough luck in the field, just one of those things. But it is really interesting to hear that I am part of that problem, and I hold my hands up and say maybe it wasn't a very responsible thing for me to have done, interestingly.
But I think we need to be careful not to swing too far the other way as well, because there are an awful lot of really good horses out there that would make good parents of the next generation.
Mm.
And it's not being openly spoken about very much. But I touched on it when I spoke at Horses Inside Out, and I think there have been a few articles reflecting on it. There's stuff going on in the horse world which is as bad as going on in the dog world in terms of selecting horses for a very narrow purpose. They're almost incapable of living a normal life the rest of the time. And
Could you mind just going into a little bit more detail on what you mean by that?
so I would say that certainly horses that have very exuberant movements that get easy rewards from the judges that don't reflect, they just look so much better than somebody who maybe takes an off-the-track thoroughbred and schools it to the same standard that does the movements immaculately, will not look as flashy as the one that's got all of this hyper engagement of every joint in its body. And there's vets running around the country keeping these horses going. And I think there's a huge question mark over the ethics of that from every perspective. And usually these things only become obvious as a major problem when it's already too late for hundreds of animals or thousands of animals, as we've seen with the breeds. I mean, if you look at the progression of dog breeds, what a English bulldog and an English bull terrier and a pug used to look like, they could all breathe. How many dogs probably nearly died in the last few weeks of heat just because they couldn't actually breathe in a normal way on a normal day. But this started, I mean, when I was a vet student, we used to have certain breeds coming into the reproductive clinic, and they'd have to go to the ICU for the students to monitor overnight in case they died. And they couldn't have sex without passing out because they couldn't breathe. So they had to be collected in an environment with the vet so that they didn't pass out and die whilst having
You talk about
semen collected.
dogs.
Dogs.
I thought you meant horses.
No.
What? No?
So that was in 1986 to 91 was when I was a student. So that's when already the writing was on the wall that the hogging was out of control. And the industry itself had absolutely no inclination to control itself such that that didn't happen. And this kind of speaks to the why sometimes you need people to put pressure on industries to do better. It's now in Holland where they won't let the Kennel Club register dogs that don't have a nose that's at least a third of the length of its head. And they put that law in place a few years ago, and they've now gone to court, and it was a charity who had to take the Kennel Club to court to actually stop them still registering dogs that were illegal. So they were breaking the law and registering, and they've now actually beautifully, the Kennel Club will be fined something like €2,500, which goes to the charity every time they register a dog illegally.
Fantastic.
And I think we just need to be mindful that when it comes to the horse world, that's probably happening in the pursuit of excellence, of breeding, what the breeding programs for the elite horses. That we need to be sure that we know what we're getting and what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
And performance is a very wide, thing. So just getting horses that jump higher will have more exuberant movement without keeping an eye on all the other stuff. Like, are the joints still healthy? Is the weight of the horse on the legs sustainable?
Yes, the legs get finer, the body gets stronger. Yeah, I've heard a lot about the neck X-rays are a complicated grey scale of it as well, because with exuberant movement you often do get a slightly less than perfect set of neck X-rays. And that actually, I mean, is there a way of regulating this? Do you think there is a way of
No, I think in the current climate, I don't think, because having rules around everything is highly unlikely to happen. We discussed this around fireworks, that ban on fireworks would solve all the stress and trauma in an instant. But there's so many people who've got different views on it, and it's just not going to happen realistically. And I think we're going to find it very difficult. So I think that really comes back down to what I, as an average horse owner, can do is not purchase a horse that encourages that kind of less reputable approach to horses. So if we're going to be breeding horses, I think we need to also retain the qualities that are there for health and vigor. So if you have a horse that's got a good conformation, being sound, has a good temperament, and has perhaps performed really well in the role that you've got, and you have an honest look at that horse and go, actually, the legs are a bit poor, or the legs are actually pretty good, but we could maybe improve that. But instead of chasing after the next horse that has lifts its legs higher or goes jumps higher because it's got a bigger hindquarter, is just to go, I'd like to keep going with more of the same. I want a good all-round horse that can do the kind of things most people want to do well. I mean, you see how successful off-the-track thoroughbreds are. You realize you don't have to breed for high-performance sports to actually have a horse that can do all those things really well.
Well, and often those horses that are so highly bred, although they may fling their legs around like wild things at 4 years old, they don't have a career at 8. So actually, if you breed horses to be 8 years old and fully grown and fully established and strong and well trained, you're far more likely to have a far more successful competition horse than if you breed super duper legs at 4, that looks like you see these foals that are moving in this really extraordinary way, and you look at them and you think, how long term is that going to be? That's a really good way of looking at it, that kind of the all-rounder is actually more
bigger, and I don't have all the answers, and it's certainly not an area I focus on, but I think it's a thing that we as consumers can influence. And when they say, what does my one vote do? But it's actually that collective responsibility. So I think galvanizing horse enthusiasts to probably just pause and think a bit more about everything they do around their horse, including what they choose. Because I think, we touched on the breeders and dealers. There are a lot of welfare cases that are linked to inappropriate breeding and dealing. Certainly infectious disease being spread through yards that import animals and don't do any biosecurity and stuff like that. But equally, if you are identifying a horse that's looking for a home, or someone's selling, and you think, I know someone who can do with a horse like that, and a client of mine is looking for a horse, and if I put a bit of work into schooling this horse, so it's actually a safe ride for them, that's what we should be doing. I think we should be encouraging riding experiences and dealers who give horses the opportunity to be matched up in the right home is actually a way of making the industry probably more robust and sustainable. So we very quickly throw out these things of, we should ban dealers or license dealers. And I think potentially you could say some licensing would be good in the sense of maybe anyone who wants to breed more than 5 or 10 or 15 a year should maybe come under some kind of scheme. But what are you going to judge them by? And we've noticed that regulation by numbers means somebody's always got a loophole. So dog breeding, what they do is they loan dogs out to someone else. So it's not theirs. Well, they sell it, but they have the rights to breed from it. So they don't register as dog breeders. So I think the regulatory world is difficult, but maybe there was a recent article on the potential impact in France where you had to get a license to own an animal.
Yeah, we spoke about this. We're really interested in it. This kind of baseline qualification, maybe.
Yeah, and frustratingly, what they've discovered is because to get it through, they had to agree not to pester people with unnecessary stuff. So now there's a very effective government-run organisation called RESPA in France that basically converts science and government policy into owner and industry-facing knowledge on infectious diseases. So to try and basically keep horrible stuff out and manage endemic disease like flu and strangles. The infrastructure, the framework, although it's meant to allow you to educate owners, they're not allowed to contact owners with stuff like Australians information. So you've got to get these things right so they actually really work. I think there's conversations going on now about can we learn from what they've done there and see whether it would work to have people basically sort of go, I want a horse, so what do I need to do? What do I need to know to at least start on this journey? And then it could be up to the industry to sort of pair them up with, go here, go to this riding school, lets you learn to ride one of their horses. And actually then you can move on to one of the horses they have for sale and they'll match you up with the right horse. You have lessons on it. And if you absolutely adore this horse, you buy it. Which then creates an avenue for another horse to come into that riding school, which stops them going sour. It gives a turnover in the yard and it gives an income for the responsible.
It's having a bit of patience, isn't it? And a little bit of a change in individual attitude, everything in moderation and just a bit more patience across the board.
I think as well that, like you're saying, that would also stave off a lot of the inappropriate purchasing, I bought an F1 car and I needed a Punto kind of situation, which I think
bought a horse in COVID because I was bored and,
Yeah. Quite a few people who asked us to help have basically not ended up with maybe being greedy and over purchase, but they purchased something that wasn't as
as it was sold.
Yeah, and I think that's where the dealing world has a bad reputation, and that's where maybe some licensing and accountability needs to come in, where it's actually there was a recent prosecution, but it was done on fraud, where people were sold horses by a particular dealer all over the country, and the way they then responded to the complaints was the typical "no problem anymore." They send you another horse, which is even worse. And in the meantime, all of these horses are struggling, and that's really gives everybody a bad name. It's interesting that in Sweden, horses are imported from other countries, and a lot of infectious disease comes in that way. But the reputation of those dealers is actually quite high because there's not enough horses bred in Sweden for the demand, particularly in riding schools. But they will bring a horse that's unseen, or maybe some photos and some video that they drop off, thinking, okay, I think this is the best match for you. And if they get a phone call and say, this horse isn't working out, they'll pick it up on the next run and bring a different one. But their aim is to satisfy the client, so they'll bring a horse more suited. So it's not about dodgy dealing, it's about being very dynamic and saying, well, actually, we can always find someone else who'll take this horse, because they're bringing decent horses over. So if they just had a bit of biosecurity, probably it'd be working really well. But that's interesting that is a very, effective economic model that seems to suit the country these horses are bred and the Swedish customers. So it is doable to do it well. It's just that perhaps over here too many people cut corners to make just that little bit more profit out of the animals, which is that what then costs the animals and the owners.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot, the kind of financial dilemma within horses and how they are often a commodity. And that is, something that I've spoken about that I don't really align with anymore. Like I used to sell horses some of the time, and now I can't get on board with that because of that element of the horse is the thing that is often at the shortest end of the stick, basically. And I think, seeing the horses here today, like over the last couple of days, has been really wonderful, really, to know that no matter their type, size, height, age, veterinary situation, they all receive all the same care. And I think that was, that really shone out yesterday, and that was really nice. I had a lot of nice cuddles with a lot of nice ponies that I would like to take home.
We'll be checking Miri's boot before we leave.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, we can rehome a lot of horses into companion homes and ridden homes because there are a lot of healthy horses here. Sometimes they need a bit of help, but I used to sort of say, if anyone wants to think about stealing the horses that we've rescued back off us, they can come and take the pick, because within a day they'll be bringing it back. Because anything that, the prettier the horse, the more likely it's got lots of problems, because it only ends up here because it didn't succeed up there because it had serious problems. And whether it's someone like Ahmed, who's the most stunning horse, was bought because somebody had already committed to buying a couple of others and then felt so sorry because he was in such a state. And she worked really hard to try and get him fixed, and the people she turned to actually made it worse. And he's now a potentially very dangerous horse in the wrong hands. But to look at him, you'd pay good money for him. But and then we've got others that you look at them and they look great as long as you don't look below the head. But they still end up having a really good quality of life. If we, and if they can't, then we do the right thing and put them to sleep if they are suffering. But there's so much we do in between of actually improving their life. But thankfully we do have a lot of horses that we have helped over the years that can be rehomed. So to anyone who's thinking of taking a horse on loan from Redwings, don't worry, we're not sending you a duffer. Absolutely.
I was about to say, having met some of the, we haven't met all of the team yet, but having met some of the behavioural team yesterday and the rehabilitation team, if I was to come across one of those ponies who had been through the process that you guys have gone through, it would be 155,000 times better trained than most of the horses that you would get through a dealer. And I do think that is a really important thing to say. If you are out there and you are thinking, I would like, looking to my horse is maybe retired now and I'd like another one, why not go through a rehoming centre? And because also the thing that you guys talk about so much is it's not like, oh yeah, anyone can come along and just buy whatever they want. There is a placing, a kind of a matching that goes on. And that is what I think is lacking so often, is dealers will sell any horse to any person. And that is not the case when it comes to you guys. And that's what then breeds positive, future-proof relationships with horses and people that is actually sustainable.
Totally.
Thank you so much, Nic. It's been
Talking to you.
Wonderful. If you do want to learn more about Redwings' work in rehab, rescue, rehoming, sanctuary, or campaigning, you can visit their website. We'll put all of the details in the show notes. So there you have it, our conversation with Nic. And just to give you a little bit of colour, we were in the room with Nic, and then we had a few of the Redwings team kind of sat nearby. And when we got off the call, we were kind of all talking about how it had gone and what we spoke about. And there was just a real sense of hope in the room. And I know that sounds a bit cheesy, but we'd obviously had some difficult discussions and talked about grappling with difficult issues in the industry and where does the money flow and all of these things. But actually, I really walked away from it feeling like there could be a positive change, and particularly in the power of the masses to make the right choice. I don't know, that's how I felt. What about you?
100%. I mean, I think one of the really important things to pick up on that we spoke about, that maybe at the time we didn't necessarily dive into in very much detail, but that you are us as the minor person, you know, as the masses as such, we do have an opportunity to make a change in terms of welfare and in terms of these charities that are not only doing good for those individuals, but doing the bigger things, the campaigning, the conversations around these harder things, and, you know, trying to be forward thinking. And I think you were really touched, weren't you, in that conversation when Nic said that actually it's or maybe it was that, you know, most of the funding comes from like the everyday person,
The people that don't have a lot, yeah.
That was it, the people that don't have a lot. And I think that's really, really powerful. And just, you know, if our message I hope our message can be that if you feel in any way inspired by this conversation today and by what we have shared and spoken about, then please act on that inspired moment, and maybe share on your social media about Redwings. Share this episode with your friends. Go on their profile, and even if you just like their posts and engage with what they're doing, if you feel you can donate, please, of course, that would be lovely. But I think we have so much power in just where we put our effort.
Yeah. Every time you choose a coach, you're putting power, you're moving power in a direction. Every time you choose who to work with, who to support, which events to go and watch, like all of this stuff is power. And I think it can feel like a very elitist sport where only the people at the top have a voice, and that's not true. So we have power, and I hope that you feel that.
Yeah, you're part of that. You are part of that power, and where you give your attention, where you put your effort, where you spend your time, those are the things that will make those bigger changes, which is amazing, right? You know, you think, oh, just me, I can't make a difference. Yeah, you can. Don't wait. Don't wait to be followed. People will come, but just start going in your own direction and keep doing those good things. And you know what?
We've talked about this on Yards, but you've no idea who's watching. And every time you advocate for your horse, every time you try a different way and you maybe choose a more positive approach, or you behave in a way that is maybe more forward thinking, you are creating a moment for somebody else potentially to be like, oh, you know, you could be what is the word for this? A role model. That's the word I was looking for.
Absolutely. Just the first person. You think the first person I said this before, the first person that ran a marathon or decided that was going to be a thing, they just because they ran 26 miles or whatever it was, doesn't mean that they were like, they just did that on their own because they believed that was a good thing to do. Maybe marathon running isn't such a good,
No, but
metaphor,
the point is, like, it felt crazy at the time, but actually...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, well, we'll leave you with some sound bites from our trip, and we hope you've enjoyed this episode. I can't wait to go back and do more with the Redwings team. It felt like just such an honour, really. Yeah. I feel a bit emotional, actually, just thinking back about how cool it was, thinking about the donkeys.
I know, it was amazing. It had a very, very special energy, and we feel very excited about this podcast and all of the comments that you've shared with us, and we have a really cracking season coming up, some amazing special voices that we hope will inspire you and continue to allow us to have open conversations about learning together and finding a better way, and we're very grateful. So Thanks for being on the journey with us.
Yeah, we'll see you guys for next time. Thank you so much for listening. Hello, just with the one eye.
It is a bit like a tourist farm, like these guys. They come with information from the site. So any behavioural needs, anything like that, and then we know what's normal for them. Any special requirements.
Got very big ears.
Again, the hilarity of working with animals is they never let you down.
I think Matilda with Rhi.
Matilda.
And then April with Miri.
Oh, very nice dog.
Bye, Matilda.
Is this Matilda?
Yeah,
And this is April.
I think so. Yeah, this is Matilda, and this is April.
If you have made it this far, and we appreciate that you have, we would love for you to follow us on Instagram. If you just search This Equestrian Life podcast and give us a follow, we'd really appreciate it.